like, oh my gosh.
Okay. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Welcome to Torah study on the rebellion of Korah. Super fun. So, fun fact about this portion. This is the portion that I gave my first drosh on 5 years ago.
Oh.
I wasn't here. I didn't get to do it again.
No. Well, I said when I gave it, I said I could give it in 5 words, but I didn't think they would let me just say one line and leave. But the summary was, if you rebel, you die.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's hopeful.
Because the New Covenant reading also is Ananias and Sapphira in Acts, and so
Oh, this week.
yeah, this week is Rebellion of Korah, number 16 through 18, and I think Acts 5 is the New Covenant reading.
There's just been rebellion, I think, every week. So
Yes, we're in a stretch of rebellion.
This
in the
last
fourth
week was
portion.
another rebellion.
Yes.
They still aren't done rebellion.
Yeah. It seems to be a theme.
I mean,
Can't they
Well-
just obey?
True. So, so we'll start out talking about this. We'll just kind of work our way through. So yeah, we are in this theme of rebellion where we've had several portions. I would kind of say we've been kind of increasing the level of intensity over the last kind of 3 portions or so, because a couple portions back they were starting to complain about the variety of food that they had, and they were asking to go back to Egypt because of that. Last week, we had the 12 spies going, the 10 bringing the bad report, the 2, Joshua and Caleb, bringing the good report, saying, yeah, we should still go. And the rest are basically like, let's appoint a new leader and go back to Egypt. And then, and still, we get to number 16 and the rebellion of Korah. So I do think it's interesting and worth pointing out, because it happens in this portion again, that we do kind of have this back and forth situation happening with the way that the narrative is told in Numbers of these rebellions, but then also continued, it's kind of like we're going back and forth between the people rebelling and wanting to go back to Egypt because apparently Egypt now is so great now that they've been in the wilderness for a year or two. But then also kind of these situations where the Lord is kind of fleshing out how to observe some of the commandments that he had given them at Mount Sinai. So I think it's like this interesting back and forth kind of seesaw effect almost of like rebellion, and the Lord has to discipline them and kind of rein them back in and prove that he is who he says he is, versus the people being like, all right, we're trying to obey you. This is what you said. How do we do this? So I think that's kind of the overarching kind of tension that we're seeing kind of throughout these portions, because we didn't really we've been focusing kind of on the rebellion ones, which we will do again a little bit today, but like last week, Numbers 15 is all about the fragrant aromas before the Lord and the sacrifices, and then this fleshing out what unintentional versus intentional sin is. And then we have this one little paragraph about the tzitzit and remembering the covenant and wearing this garment to remind them of all of the commandments. So which will play that. It's interesting that comes right before this rebellion thing. Okay, so first of all, who is Korah? Who is he and why do we care about him?
he's a Levite.
He is a Levite. He is. He's a Levite. He's a descendant of Kohath. The Kohathites, we talked about actually, I think in the first portion of Numbers. anybody remember what their role was? Or why we talked about them? It was several weeks ago. Look at Numbers 4, 1 through 4. So it says, Adonai spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying, take a census of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi by their families and by their ancestral households, everyone from 30 years of age to 50, all who come to serve doing the work in the tent of meeting. This is the task of the sons of Kohath in the tent of meeting, the most holy things. I'm going to read a couple more verses. When the camp is about to move out, Aaron and his sons are to take down the shield and curtain, and cover the ark of the testimony with it. And then they are to cover this with porpoise hide, then spread over it a solid blue cloth. They are to put the poles in place. They do kind of the same thing with the table of showbread and all of this. So over them they are to spread a scarlet cloth. Keep going. So they're basically all of this covering things, taking down and covering things, putting them on poles, ready to be transported. So verse 15, when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all its holy implements, and when the camp is ready to move out, after everything's ready, the sons of Kohath may come and do the carrying, but they must not touch the holy items or they will die. These are the tasks of the sons of Kohath in regard to the tent of meeting. Skipping down to 17, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, you are not to let the families of the tribe of the Kohathites be cut off from among the Levites. Do this for them so that they may live and not die whenever they approach the most holy items. Aaron and his sons are to go into the sanctuary and assign each man his job and his responsibility. But the Kohathites are not to go in and look at what is holy, not even momentarily, or they will die. So, they have a pretty significant role, right? Mm-hmm. They're part of the tabernacle service. They're part of carrying the tent of meeting, the items. Kind of knowing what we know now that we're about to look at this rebellion in Numbers 16, it's interesting to look back at Numbers 4 and see that there's this specific warning that Adonai specifically tells Moses and Aaron that you're not to let the families of the Kohathites be cut off. It's I think it's very interesting that it's like he knows or something.
Yeah.
You know? So,
do you feel like, though, it could also be, because it says if they touch this stuff, they'll die, which would cut them off. So it's like keep an extra special eye on them, so like a protective thing, too, there?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's kind of multifaceted. I think it's, you know, I think it's partially like, you know, there's this specific role. This is a particular one that's very easy to, even by mistake, you know, even accidentally kind of go beyond the specification of carrying to looking at. I mean, if you're carrying objects, it's not unreasonable to look at them or to touch them.
Yeah,
right, you know, like it's very specific. And so I think there's maybe some protection that it's kind of like, hey, everybody, and it's also this community thing. It's like everybody's kind of in charge, is responsible for helping everybody else fulfill their role, fulfill their task, fulfill their assigned job.
Do you think the rebellion might have spurred out of it just being way too strict? Or, you know, it's so weighty to have to fulfill that.
I mean,
constantly under that pressure. I don't know.
Perhaps.
Are there any indications in the word?
Well, when we look at the rebellion, which is where we're going to go next, so that's a good transition. When we start to look at this, because really what's happening is, so let me back up before we go directly there. Let me remind us of one more thing. So we've kind of talked about some of the symmetry in the Torah, that Numbers is a little bit parallel to Exodus. And in Exodus we had several rebellions and several grumblings, if you want to say, against, I mean, they were directed at Moses and Aaron, but they're really against the Lord. They're really like, hello, you brought us out here and now it feels like you're leaving us to die. So it's basically they are protesting against the Lord, saying, you did this, you need to provide for us. So in this section particularly, we're going to look at who they're really protesting about. And so I don't know that we can look for it as we go through. I don't know that it stuck out to me specifically that it was because their role was so strict. Because really their role as Kohathites is not specifically, like they don't talk about it in detail in this portion. So I think it's more about what they're protesting.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's look at some of that.
Okay.
Okay. So let's start working through number 16. Or did somebody else have something?
No, I agree with what you said,
Okay.
based on what it says in number 16.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. So number 16, verse 1. Now Korah, son of Izhar, son of Kohath, son of Levi, and the sons of Reuben. Pause the sons of Reuben. So what's interesting here, so we have the Kohathites, sons of Korah. We talked about Levites, and the sons of Reuben. Who's Reuben? Reuben's the firstborn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have the Levites and the firstborns who are getting angry here. So the sons of Reuben, Dathan and Abiram, sons of Eliab and On, son of Peleth, rose up against Moses and took 250 men for Bnei Israel, men of renown who had been appointed to the council. They assembled against Moses and Aaron, and they said to them, "You've gone too far. All the community is holy, all of them, and Adonai is with them. Then why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of Adonai?" So what are they actually mad about? What are they getting upset about?
Well, the fact that I think that they aren't allowed to look at anything or touch anything holy. And they're
Okay.
they're saying, we're all holy. So it's like
Mhm.
they think the leaders are putting themselves above, and they feel like they're feeling beneath them maybe
Mm-hmm.
in some way, that like their rank or something is below, and they're coming against, I guess they're feeling disqualified in some way, I don't know.
Yeah. So they're kind of coming against the authority,
Authority, yeah.
right? They're coming against the authority of Moses and Aaron.
Mhm.
But do they have any, does their claim that the whole community is holy, that everyone is holy, does that hold any weight? Do they have any grounds to make that claim?
I don't think so.
Okay. Why not?
I don't know.
Okay.
It says Adonai is with them, so are they saying the fact that Adonai is with them makes them holy? So then it sort of would be true, because that's part of the statement,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole community being holy?
If they're all wearing the tzitzits, like it says above, and in verse 15, verse 40, this way you will remember and obey all my mitzvot, and you will be holy to your God.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're basing it off the fact that we're doing what he says, so therefore it says that we're all holy, then their argument is you're exalting your holiness. And in reality, when you look at all of Aaron's mistakes, it's really not a who's holier than who issue here.
Right.
It's who God appointed
Right.
and respecting the appointment of the Lord,
Mhm.
who was told to do what, and so they're rebelling against roles.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's the connection that I was seeing too, is that, right above it says, if you do this, then you're holy. So so based off of that could be what they're referring to is, we've just been told if we wear these garments and we obey the commands that we're holy. Another one, going back to Exodus, at Mount Sinai, one of the things that Adonai says to Moses and Moses conveys on is that Israel has been made a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So they have been hearing some of these things, that they are, as a nation, that they are holy and set apart. So in that regard, the accusation that they're making maybe holds some weight. But at the same time, so I'm just kind of recapping what you guys have been saying, because I think you're right. Because I think we have this reality that because they are the nation that God has chosen, and His presence is dwelling among them, there is an element of holiness. They are all required to participate in the commandments, in the ritual purity laws, in, on and on and on. All these things, the sacrifices, the festivals, all of these different things. And yet, Moses and Aaron, Moses specifically, Moses is the only one allowed to go into the direct presence of the Lord. So I think I like what you're saying. It's not really about who's more holy than someone else. Again, with Aaron also, because Aaron is, Aaron has this very specific role also, but at the same time, leadership does not equal a higher level of holiness, right? So I think that what we're getting to, like how we're seeing this now, hopefully, is that they're trying to kind of work this out. They're trying to work out this reality that this is what God has said about the nation as a whole. This is what He said even about the tzitzit and all of these things. And yet, we have these people who are exercising authority. So what does that mean? Okay.
I have a verse. I was trying to look up something that was parallel in the Torah, but 1 Samuel 15:22 says obedience is greater than sacrifice. Actually, the rest of the verse is pretty good. Has the Lord has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams.
Yeah, and so I think, thinking in terms of obedience, the question that we have to ask back here is, are they potentially trying to figure out who, is being obedient to Moses and Aaron the same as being obedient to the Lord? I'm just kind of posing that question based off of what you're saying and based off of the leadership structure that we currently have in this section of Torah. I mean, I think that's a good connection. I think it fits in with this. So that's just kind of, I think it's another layer of it, because that's part of the authority thing is like, too, right? It's like, we see this wrestle in the church today, I think, is like, is it thus saith the Lord directly from the Lord, only thing I'm going to listen to, or do you listen to your human authority in your congregation or whatever as well?
Well, I think, wasn't that context when Saul went ahead and made that sacrifice to wait on God to ask before he was going to war, and he didn't wait for Samuel, and he was supposed to wait for Samuel. And Samuel delayed somehow a little bit extra. So that's almost like a exact parallel, I think, because he didn't obey God through Samuel. So like what you said, I thought that's exactly what happened. And then what happened when he said, as soon as he did that, he goes, the kingdom's been torn. Now God's already choosing someone else because you didn't obey the command.
Right.
That's good. Yeah.
I think it also comes into coveting somebody else's position.
Yeah.
And I mean, you see that in workplaces, like in all the years that I was in workplaces where somebody wants somebody else's job, and they always think it's better the higher up you are, and so there's that little, it's almost like a jealousy driven thing there. And so, I mean, one of the main commandments, thou shalt not covet. And in this instance, in a sense, it's like, even though it may not say thou shalt not covet someone else's position, but that's really kind of what they're wanting.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to do that too. And when I look at especially like the rebellion of Korah, I mean, these are Levites, so this is like, within the same tribe, you guys get to actually participate but it's still not good enough, and that's kind of where it comes from. It's like the Lord gave you a special role that nobody else gets to do, but it's still not good enough.
Right. Yeah, which is exactly what Moses' response is. Because these next several verses, Moses heard this fell on his face, as is his typical response to these types of things. So then they talk about, he talks about basically how the Lord is going to reveal who is his, who is holy. They talk about this fire and incense thing. So then verse 8, Moses also said to Korah, "Listen now, sons of Levi, isn't it enough that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel to bring you near to him, to do the work of the tabernacle of Adonai, and to stand before the community and to minister to them? So he brought you close along with all your fellow sons of Levi, but you are seeking the priesthood too. Therefore you and all your following are banding together against Adonai. Who then is Aaron that you are grumbling against him?" So we'll stop there for a second. So this is Moses' response is exactly what you're saying. He's saying, is it not enough? Because again, there's one tribe out of 12 that are the ones who are actually in some version in the tabernacle space, actually doing the ministry in the tabernacle. So he's saying, is it not enough that but at the same time they're Levites, they're not the exact priestly line of Aaron, and so of the high priest and so they're not in the inner courts and all of this stuff. So they're doing more of the outer work, but they're helping people prepare their sacrifices. They're helping, they're basically, their job is to assist the rest of the community in bringing their sacrifices and coming before to worship the Lord. It's a significant role. I think there is pressure to it. So I think that, when there's the weight of responsibility, sometimes that causes people to react in different ways. But ultimately, I think what you're saying is true, that they're basically, okay, they have this chosen position, but there's one that's in their eyes is quote unquote more chosen. It's better, and so they want to, like you're saying, climb the ladder. And while you were talking, what it was making me think of is, we'll see if I can explain this. It's been a year since I've read this book. So we'll see if I can explain this concept. So I took a class last summer because Dr. Michael Brown was teaching it. It was the studies in the new anti-Semitism. And one of the books we had to read was called Anti-Semitism and Its Metaphysical Origins.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow.
It was all of the reading for that class was really intense, including a book that was an anti-Semitic Christian in some sense, that was like my ears rang while I read it. It was, I actually can't remember the title of it right now, which is probably the word, because I'm not going to recommend that you read it. But this other book, Anti-Semitism and Its Metaphysical Origins, the claim that they were making, and I'm not necessarily recommending you read it either, unless you want to read a really kind of technical, scholarly work about anti-Semitism, but whatever. But the point that they were trying to make was they were tracing kind of the roots of anti-Semitism all the way back to the garden, which was really fascinating. But basically the claim that they were making it, how they were suggesting the root of anti-Semitism came to be, was that in the garden, the deception was about the enemy coming and deceiving Adam and Eve to want to be God, right? Because that's what he wanted, to eat the fruit of the knowledge, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is to be like God, right? That was the claim, is if you eat this, you will be like God. And so how they kind of laid out this principle was that if you can't, it's basically that the enemy's scheme is to try to kill God, which we know is impossible. But that's the root of anti-Semitism, is trying to kill God. If you can't kill God, you can kill his people. Going all the way back to this root of this human sin, this human fall of wanting to be like God. I don't know if that really makes sense. Again, it was metaphysical origins, and it was a really interesting book to read. But the point is, I don't know, is going back to this whole, we want, always wanting something better. So the original thing is, when the first humans who are walking with God in this perfect creation, they still want more. They want God's position. So I think what we're seeing happen here, the connection I'm trying to make, is that that's what's still playing out, even among humans. The earth obviously there's a lot of other things going on the earth at this point in the Torah and now. But the point is, we always still want something better, and the suggestion of what that book was making was that it's all unto us wanting to be like God, and the enemy's scheme is to try to come against that in some sense trying to kill God. So it goes into, and so then anti-Semitism comes out of, if the Jewish people are God's chosen people, then his goal is to annihilate them because his name is on them.
So while we were like giving all those things of what we thought maybe happened with Korah,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking, where did that seed come from?
Mhm.
And that's perfect. That
Yeah.
because that seed
Yeah.
has been planted way back
Yeah.
and continues on to be like God.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted that highest position because wasn't Moses like God to
Yeah.
the people?
Yeah, Moses was like this representative like God to the people, and it was,
Mhm.
and which is why, in Jewish tradition, Moses is like everything,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this high level of honor. But there's so many parallels. I mean, we could talk all day about the parallels between Moses and Yeshua. I mean,
Right,
he is one of these foreshadowing characters. There's lots of them in the Torah, but Moses is definitely one of them, as this leader among the people. So yeah,
Wanting that
it seems that
position.
things never changed. We always want something other than what we have. Okay. So let's keep going here a little bit. So then verse 12, he goes and calls Dathan and Abiram, who are the sons of Reuben. So that he was dealing with kind of the priestly side of things. Now we're dealing with the sons of Reuben, firstborns. So we really kind of have two rebellions going on here simultaneously. And they say, we will not come. And in another translation I was looking at, it's probably a better translation to say, we will not go up. Meaning, they're not coming to Moses, but they're also not going, they're saying they're not going to go up to the land. As we keep reading, we'll kind of see that is partially what they're upset about too. Which is interesting, just kind of a fun random side note about the Hebrew there, because we will not go up is probably better because the root of the verb there is Allah, or to go up, which is connected with aliyah, which is the term that we use for people who immigrate to Israel, meaning going up to Israel. So it's
Which
kind of
verse was that?
this is verse 12. In TLV it says we will not come, but we will not go up is what many other translations say, and what probably the Hebrew would say. So in verse 13, continuing on, we will not come or we will not go up. Isn't it enough that you brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey, only to kill us in the wilderness? And now you would lord it over us. What's more, you haven't brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you now gouge out eyes of those men? We will not come. We won't come. Okay, so now we have another layer of rebellion here. It's always very striking to me to read this. You brought us from a land flowing with milk and honey. It's like, it like hits my heart a little bit, but because that is, of course, what we know, how God describes and how the land of Israel has been described, that this promised land is the land flowing with milk and honey. So that we're seeing that, again, their deception is growing, that they think that they're saying they've been brought out of this abundant, almost promised land type of place into the wilderness, which is alarming.
Basically accusing of lying too.
Yeah.
Distrust.
Yeah. Right. They're not trusting, because again, we're right after this episode with the spies and the report that they've gotten. Except for when you go back, they're so, like, basically the dissension has been sown so effectively in the people that because the report from the spies is that the land is good. They see that the land is good, that there's all this produce, that everything about the land itself is true, and everything they say about it is good. And that's what Joshua and Caleb even say. This land is an exceptionally good land. The issue is all the people who are living there, right? And so to say that it's not a land flowing with milk and honey is not even accurate to the report that the spies brought back. So there is some intense deception going on here.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So do you think, because of the previous rebellion with the spies, where the Lord tells them, you're not gonna get to go in, do you think there's a discouragement on there now, cause they realize they're actually not gonna get to go in too?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely an element of that, because also when we didn't talk about fully last week either, is because they tried to go back when God, you know, when God says, all right, turn around, you're gonna hang out in the wilderness for 40 years, you're gonna spend 1 year for every day that the spies spent in the land, in the wilderness. They try to go back and fight, and it does not go well for them. So I think that they feel, you know, maybe they feel like they're between a rock and a hard place. It's like they know that this land is there and what God said. They know their own disobedience. They tried to, in their eyes, make it right, but that's not what God said, so it doesn't work. And so now they're like, I think there's maybe an element of feeling stuck. Because they know that they're not going to get to go, which is also, I don't know, I'm going to suggest, the text doesn't say this, I'm going to suggest there's an element of selfishness in that.
Yeah.
Because at the same time that God is saying that you don't get to go in, your generation is going to die, the next generation is going to go in. So really, but they're like, we don't get to go in, we want to go back to Egypt. Because we at least know what that is, we know we're going to be fed, we're going to, all this. But their children still have the promise. So I would suggest there's a level of selfishness here. I don't know. Like I said, the text doesn't say that, but maybe. Could be, as Tom would say.
Well, I'm still skirting the fact that they caused the problem.
Sure. Yeah, it's not taking responsibility, which
Yeah.
again goes back to the garden.
Yeah.
Because, you know, God says, why are you hiding?
Yeah.
Well, the woman gave me, well, the serpent told me,
Mm-hmm.
passing blame, we don't ever want to take responsibility. Like that's the first, you know, that's the root of, you know, the
So
garden
even though
not
they
taking
don't
responsibility.
say that here,
Yeah.
it can be going on in their mind
Mhm.
right now.
Yeah.
They completely forgot that, well, we did cause this.
Yeah. Could be. But I think there's a lot going on here. Okay, so that's really, so at this point we basically have the full context of the rebellion set up here. We're not gonna go as verse by verse through the rest of all of this. I wanna point out a couple more things, and then I wanna look at, well, we'll just keep going. Okay. So, in verse, so basically after they're saying all of this, Moses is angry, understandably so, and he asks the Lord not to accept their offering, because remember they've kind of set up this whole where they're going to bring incense and fire to see who the Lord chooses. And so Moses is now asking the Lord not to accept their offering. And then, so then they bring this offering, and Adonai, the glory of Adonai shows up down in verse 19, 20. And the Lord tells that Moses and Aaron to separate themselves so that they can, from the assembly, so that he can consume them. And again, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces and cry out, "O God," verse 22, "O God, God of the spirits of all flesh, if one man sins, will you be angry with the entire community?" And so he still tells them to move away. But the families of the ones who are Korah and Dathan and Abiram are still there. And in verse 28, Moses says, "By this you will know that Adonai has sent me to do all these works, but they are not from my own heart. If every one of these men die a common death and experience what happens to all people, then Adonai has not sent me. But if Adonai brings about a new thing, and the earth opens her mouth and swallows them and everything that is theirs, and they go down alive into Sheol, then you will know that these men have despised Adonai." So as soon as he finished saying all these things, the ground split under them. Then the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them, along with all their households, all of Korah's people, and all their possessions. They went down alive into Sheol. They and everything that was theirs. The earth closed over them, and they were gone from among the community. Okay, so we said earlier that really the main thing that they were rebelling against, that Korah was rebelling against, was this authority of Moses and Aaron. So Moses is basically he's basically asking the Lord to show, like, he knows that the Lord has set him in this position, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he's asking the Lord to demonstrate this. And so we have another one of these. There's all these passages throughout all of Torah that the Lord said to Moses, and detail, all this different stuff. And then it says, and Moses said to the people, basically exact repetition, or sometimes it will just say, and the people did exactly as the Lord said. So this is that same pattern here. So we have Moses saying, if the Lord has sent me, this is what's going to happen. If not, then I'm not who I said I am. And basically, he's signing his own death sentence at that point, because I can't imagine that if this had gone the other way, that they wouldn't have immediately taken Moses out. But obviously, that's not what happens, because he is doing what the Lord said. And so the earth opens up and swallows these people. So earthquakes, and then we're going to get into fire. So we have earthquakes and fire. What else does earthquakes and fire make you think of?
Elijah, when he goes up to
Elijah, but we'll be before this. We've already had some of these in the Torah. I mean, you're right. I mean, I think they all connect, but Mount Sinai, and then think New Covenant.
Well, there's an earthquake at the cross.
Yeah, and even looking toward
Revelation.
looking toward Revelation, and we have a shadow of it at Shavuot in Acts 2, right?
Yeah.
So, earthquakes and fire. The Lord seems to like to use these natural things, and I don't know that I have a really profound statement about why he does that, but I'm just pointing out the pattern that these earthquakes and fire moments especially this at the sound of at Moses' command is that's kind of the. So to point out that the new thing is not necessarily that there's this earthquake. Yes, I think it's strange. It's probably not a normal thing to see the ground actually open up and swallow people. But
In a specific.
right, but it's in a specific place,
Right there.
and it's at the word of the Lord, and through Moses, and so that's kind of the sign. So just kind of pointing out that
The
pattern.
whole thing speaks authority.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
And even authority, at Shavuot, and
Mhm.
authority at Mount Sinai.
Right.
Your authority, show, it's
Right. Because at Mount Sinai, all the people know that there's this earthquake and fire happening, but Moses is the only one that's up on the mountain,
Mhm.
right? But everybody down at the base, they're kind of freaking out. So people tend to kind of freak out when the Lord shows up this way.
mm-hmm.
And it just depends on what the situation is on how that's actually going to go down for them. But because their response here is that everybody flees because they're afraid the earth is going to swallow them too, which we find out later is a valid concern. So,
But he warns them.
He does. I mean, that's the thing about the Lord is because again, the difficult thing about some of these passages and numbers and all these really dramatic things that happen is these are the passages that people use to say, well, the God of the Old Testament is this God of wrath. He takes people out, whatever. And it's but he warns them. It's not like a surprise.
Right.
The consequences for their disobedience are not surprises. And later on, we'll get into all this blessing and curse and things. Later on in the Torah, there talks more about some of that. But it's because it talks about when you're disobedient and I cast you out of the land. It's he tells them before they even go in the land that they're going to get kicked out. It's these things are not surprises.
Mm-hmm.
He's just holding to his word, which is where I want to go with this next, because basically at this point, this all carries out, and ultimately, there's another plague that comes in and takes out 14,700 more people. So by the time this is all said and done, we have almost 15,000 people that have died in this situation. But sorry, go ahead.
With the sons of Korah,
Mhm.
in something that when I was reading this again, and because of the recent Psalm scriptures we read by the sons of Korah, I'm looking at like the beauty of the fact that before this all happened, the Lord had said he wanted this group preserved.
Right.
We have those that rebelled that died, but obviously not all the sons of Korah
Right.
died. So then there's this beautiful redemptive purpose in the fact that they're the ones that are writing the Psalms to exalt the Lord.
Right.
Or their
From,
children.
their children, their descendants. That's to me like, here was the epitome of a judgment on a group of people, yet those that survived are the ones that wrote some of the most
Right.
beautiful psalms.
Exactly. And that's the very next thing in my notes.
Yeah.
Perfect
Wow.
She read
timing. Did you steal my notes,
No.
Moz? I'm just kidding. Yeah, well, that's what, I was reading through this, I was trying to think about Torah study, and that's actually what I was thinking about this week, is that because, these rebellion narratives get real heavy for me, and it's like, oh man, come on, guys, like, again, like and the Lord quickly brings conviction about my own life, but I read these and I'm like, Lord, how could they not see you? They can see your presence with them day and night. I don't understand, but it's the human condition, right? So we can think of examples, I'm sure, that parallel in all of our own lives. But the Lord, I did feel what the Lord was saying was, to me, was that he's like, look at the redemption. Look for the redemption, because he was reminding me of the Psalms of the sons of Korah, which were obviously written much later. So that means there has to still be sons of Korah. So I just did a search. It's not exhaustive. But I just did a search of other places, that the sons of Korah are mentioned later. And just to give a couple of examples, we're not going to go there exhaustively, but 1 Chronicles 9 and 26 are giving some records of some genealogies, but it specifically describes the sons of Korah as the gatekeepers in the tabernacle, which is the role that's specifically described in Numbers of what they're doing. And even in this portion, if we skip ahead to Numbers 18, 3. It's talking about the sons. So basically, it's reiterating the duty of the Levites in the tabernacle, and it seems to suggest that the sons of Korah would still be here. Verse 3 says, they are to perform their duties for you and for all the matters related to the tent. They must not approach the implements. Again, it's this really specific instruction that they're not allowed to actually touch these things. Must not approach the implements of the sanctuary or the altar, otherwise both you and they will die. But they are to team with you to attend to the tent of meeting for all the service of the tent, but no authorized person may intrude upon you. So really through all of this, because again, we mentioned earlier that that they've been selected, even this is what Moses' response to them when they're rebelling basically, is that you've been chosen to serve and to minister to the rest of the people, which means, we talked about, that means they're responsible for helping other people as they're coming to bring their sacrifices and things like that. So they're kind of in this role of kind of assisting with all of that, which part of that would be making sure that, some random person doesn't storm the tabernacle and go in. They're basically the guards. They're helping people stay where they're supposed to stay and out of where they're not supposed to go, which goes for them as well. So even out of this rebellion, that's still their role. They're still acting in this role. And then, of course, as Lori was mentioning, we have these psalms that were written by the sons of Korah. Oh, in in 2 Chronicles 20, in this narrative about basically they're about to go to war against the Moabites and the Ammonites under Jehoshaphat, and he calls a fast, and basically they're described in that, the sons of Korah, or the Kohathites are described in that passage as those who stand to praise the Lord. So that's kind of the indication that they are these ones that praise and write songs or something like that. That's one of the connections that's made. And then, of course, so they write Psalms 42 through 49, 84, 85, 87, 88. And, of course, within that, probably one of the more famous ones is Psalm 46, that we all know very well. So there are all these psalms about God's presence in Zion, God's presence with the people in Zion. And so, and one of I was reading a couple different Jewish commentaries, and one of the suggestions is that they kind of have this theme of redemption from Sheol, because the consequence was that all these people were swallowed up, and sent down to Sheol alive. And so then they're writing these songs praising the Lord kind of with the redemption in mind. And it does seem to suggest that they're writing from a place of remembering that they have escaped death, that they have been preserved. Again, going back to what we started with in the beginning in Numbers 4, of God specifically saying, you cannot let these people be cut off. They have this role to play, and then he does it. And so I think that it's interesting, too, to think about, because Rich has been teaching, even all this replacement theology stuff, and we've been talking about the Lord's faithfulness to the Jewish people. Like, I think that even just looking at this, and even though this number 16 rebellion of Korah situation is so dramatic, that we also see the redemption of it. God said they can't be cut off. I need them.
Yeah.
They still rebel. There's severe consequences, but then we still see them fulfilling the role that God said from the beginning.
That's so important to remember that whole, why we study the Torah, because that's what God did then, he's still doing. That, like what you just stated, not to cut off a whole people, because the next generation is important. He has roles for them to play. They were to be psalmists and singers before God. And we've all seen or been a part of generations who've almost been cut off, but we might be the grandchildren, or our grandchildren might be, that we pray for, are going to go ahead. They're so important. They're still children who are so important, and we'll pray for the next generation. That's why we pray for the next generation.
Right.
We don't know what we didn't fulfill, they're going to fulfill. Or they're going to do greater works. They're going to walk in God, and God's going to use them. So we can't let any, it's like God's, whoever God says his people, he says he doesn't want to cut off, because he's got other things more for them to do, or their grandchildren to do.
Right.
It's just a really important concept to remember.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
And I'm from a second line, and then I know that I was, one of whatever, being saved for a purpose. So I think about not just me, but I think about my children and my grandchildren. And so it's just a little tiny thing, pieces of it. Everybody you can see that in their family line, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree. And I think, on both sides, if you're seeing even the generation that it's like, it doesn't seem like it's following the Lord, to not give up hope. The family line comes back and is restored eventually, right? Because we don't,
Absolutely.
It takes time for some of these things to play out. But it
does.
goes even back to the promise that, your iniquities, their transgressions will go to the third and fourth generation, but the blessing goes to 1,000 generations. And so clearly the point is here, right? What you're saying is the generations matter.
Right.
And it's not, and again, like pointing back to what we were suggesting earlier about, they know that their generation knows that they're not going to enter the land. And so at this point, it seems possible that they're not considering the next generation, right? That generation is gonna inherit. And of course, and also we see that, like and we're gonna continue. We're gonna, in the last few minutes, we're gonna continue on a little bit and look at some of this, a couple things about Aaron, but even with Moses' response to their rebelling against his authority, his response is, because he's connected, I think because he's connected with the heart of the Lord, he's like, you can't, he's like, you can't punish the whole people. You can't kill, we're not going to annihilate the entire community because of the sins of one man. And so he's crying out for the preservation of the people. And the fact that, Moses and Aaron, their response when there's going to be these major moments of death and destruction are to cry out to the Lord. I think are significant because they know what he said and they see the significance of the ongoing plan. So basically at this point we've dealt with the accusations of Korah and the sons of Reuben kind of are against Moses and Aaron. So we've kind of dealt with the Moses aspect of it. Moses has the Lord has kind of put his stamp of approval on Moses by, unfortunately, opening up the earth and swallowing some people. But so his authority has kind of been reinforced here. So let's look at Aaron a little bit because we have this really interesting passage or chapter in number 17 about these staffs that they're gonna see if they sprout almonds. So the Lord speaks to Moses and tells him to have basically the head of each tribe bring a staff with their name on it. Aaron's name is to be on the staff for the tribe of Levi. And they bring him to the tent of meeting, and so Adonai says he's going to meet with them. And he says in verse 5, it says, "It will come about that the staff of the man I choose will sprout. I will then rid myself of the grumblings of Bnei Israel who are grumbling against you." So the Lord is even acknowledging they're having an authority issue. So they do this. They do as they say. So verse 8, the next day Moses entered the tent of testimony, and behold, Aaron's staff from the house of Levi had sprouted, blossomed, and produced almonds. Moses then brought all the staffs from Adonai's presence to all Bnei Israel, and they looked, and each man took his staff. Adonai said to Moses, "Put Aaron's staff back in front of the testimony to keep as a sign of the sons of rebellion, so that it may put an end to their grumblings against me, and so that they will not die." And Moses did just as Adonai commanded. But Bnei Israel said to Moses, saying, "Look, we will die. We are all lost. We are lost. Anyone approaching the tabernacle of Adonai will die. Must all of us die?" So they're feeling the weight of what happened. They're seeing the problem here. So basically, but this is this is kind of the Lord's response to the grumblings against Aaron, right? So like, why does Aaron have this right of being this priest? And it's, this is kind of the proof. And they're instructed to keep Aaron's staff that has sprouted, which part of me wonders, since they have to keep it, part of me is like, this is just a really random thought. We have no way to know this. Like, does it stay, like, do the almonds and blossoms, like, do they stay, like, fresh forever? Like, is this some kind of ongoing miracle that it's like this? I don't know. I have no
Say
idea.
yes.
Yeah. It would be nice, wouldn't it? It'd be really, like, that'd be kind of cool. I have no idea. Probably not. Maybe, who knows, whatever. It's not really important. It's just a random, that's just my random, like, does it stay pretty forever? I have no idea. Anyway, the point is they keep it. So at this point, what are other things that have been kept that they're supposed to keep, basically, in the Ark of the Covenant? We have a couple other things that they've...
2 tablets.
The tablets. Mm-hmm.
Manna.
And manna. Mm-hmm. Those are the main ones I'm thinking of. I can't remember if there's anything else. The 3 things I always think of are the tablets, the manna, and Aaron's staff that they keep. So what are those things signs of, or what do those items represent? So we'll start with the tablets. What do the tablets represent? The law, the Word of God. Pretty simple. But what are some of the things that are connected with when Moses received those tablets? Because the set that's in the ark is the second set, right?
Right.
Why isn't it the first set?
Moses threw them down.
Because Moses broke them. Why did he break them?
Because people rebelled.
Because people were rebelling. Interesting. So the manna. Why do they have manna? Provision. What happened to? What was that the Lord responding to when he gave them manna? Grumbling and complaining. And now we have Aaron's staff. Why do we have Aaron's staff?
Confirmation of
Fighting.
Yeah, and this one even says as a sign to the sons of rebellion.
Yeah.
How interesting. How interesting that all of the items, and there's a lot of different ways you could look at them. I'm kind of pulling out a specific theme here, but how interesting interesting is that these items that are supposed to be kept as signs of the covenant and signs that of provision of the Lord are all connected to disobedience and rebellion and grumbling and complaining and whining and wanting to go back to Egypt.
So is what they did with the bronze censers.
Yeah.
I mean, they hammered it, it's an overlay of the,
Right.
on the altar as a reminder
Mm-hmm.
of rebellion.
Right. Not to mention, where did all the materials come from to construct the tabernacle in the first place?
Right, that's a tricky one.
How did they get all of that gold and all of that
That's
Egypt.
really,
That's
plundered the
fiber.
Egyptians.
from the Egyptians? They
Yeah.
plundered the Egyptians on their way out. Isn't that really interesting? The Lord constructs his dwelling place and has these specified reminders in the Ark of the Covenant that have less than spotless histories, I guess you could say. Because of things that they're plundering from the Egyptians, yeah, jewelry and things like that, but idols, other pagan type implements, that then of course they're being melted down.
Fire.
Yeah. So, but underlying that, yes, they're reminders of all this rebellion and stuff, but it's the visual representation of the Lord's redemption, right, and purification, because even this example, they're this bronze overlay that they're making out of these censers. It's like it's been made something new. It's made new. So the entire tabernacle experience, and which is pointing us to the temple, which is pointing us to Yeshua, are all this visual of things being made new, right? Which is pretty cool if you think about it. I don't know. I think it's pretty cool.
Hope.
Yeah.
And it reminds, those three things of the seed we were talking about. Reminded that it's like, you're always gonna need to deal with this. But there's always hope.
Right. Right.
And still for us.
Yeah. Which I think, and even another aspect of that is going back to kind of what we talked about. We have this I kind of called it like a little bit of a seesaw effect. I don't know if that's the best way to think about it. With even when we're reading about all these rebellions, is that they're going back and forth between the rebellion and also these examples of really, I think they're building relationship and intimacy and closeness with the Lord, trying to work out these, how to obey the commands, which we see again here, because Numbers 18, we're not gonna work our way all the way through that one, but it's about, again, we even talked about, even in this very first section, and we're seeing this example that the sons of Levi are still fulfilling the roles that God said before, even in the aftermath of this really crazy rebellion and consequence. So we're coming back to more of, and basically this is all about the Lord showing and providing for the Levites and the priests, right? And basically he's saying, all these sacrifices and all these things that are brought are for you, because they're not gonna inherit land once they actually go in the land. Their inheritance is this role, this ministry, this act of service, and all these things, and so the Lord provides for them through even the worship of other people in some way. And so we have this great, and of course the breaking out of the portions happened much later. It wasn't written specifically that way. But I just think it's really interesting, these last three portions, as we have this building rebellion, they're always coming back to, okay, how do we worship the Lord? How do we interact with the Lord? How do we walk out this process of all this instruction that he's given us? Which is very relational, because that's how relationships work, right? If you read any kind of relationship, whatever therapy-based stuff, they talk about relationship ruptures and repairs. Like you fight with someone, a friend, a significant other, whoever, you have to reconcile it, right? And I think I think that's what's being demonstrated in the Torah. So,
So are you saying that they're kind of like, this is like their portion of the promised land that they're receiving? deceiving. Is that what you were saying earlier?
As far as like the priest in the tabernacle?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, oh, that's cool, yeah.
Yeah.
Because God says, I am your portion
Mhm.
in chapter 18.
Yeah.
So though they don't get to enter,
Right.
they still get some.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so, yeah,
That
so
intimacy.
yes,
Okay.
they get this intimacy because, yeah, there's still this, yeah, even though they're not gonna take the land, the Lord's presence is still with them. Like, he doesn't remove their presence, his presence from them.
Right.
Like, we still, like, that's the whole thing, like, as we, like, they're continuing on, they're continuing to build relationship with him. It's not like, because, and again, I think this goes back to some of the connection between, seeing the contrast between Adonai, the God of Israel, versus pagan gods of the time. It's like, other gods would have left, or they would have annihilated people, which is even what Moses' response was last week, in last week's portion, is like, if you wipe everybody out, the gods in the people in Egypt are gonna think that you're just like every other god. Like, you can't do that because you're not like every other god. So it's even like, which of course, like, the Lord is always trying to get a response out of people of to reflect in their own hearts and see if they've caught the vision, right? Like the Lord asks questions because we need the answer, not because he does.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's on, you know, like, yeah, they don't get to go in the land, but it's the generational, he's preparing the next generation for one, and also he's still being faithful. Like, he doesn't remove his presence because he said he wouldn't, and he's covenantally faithful. So, yeah. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, reflections? Yeah.
I have a question
Mm-hmm.
in my mind this whole time.
Yeah.
I don't understand the correlation between not going into the land you're not going into the promised land. Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, the land with God, and salvation. Like, how does that, because you say they know they're not going into the land. Is that not going into, my mind thinks, is that the kingdom of God they're being kept out of? Or they're just being out of a part of the best part of, you know what I'm saying? Because you're saying they still get to be with God, but they're not going into, and my mind thinks it's like, you rebelled, so you're not going into is this like, in my mind, I'm thinking simple things like salvation, kingdom of God, and yet they're still in God's presence somewhat. I don't know, but they're only their children are going forward with God. So are they still in the kingdom of God saved, or are they being are they being kept out because they rebelled?
I think it's challenging to use language
It
like
is.
salvation.
I shouldn't say that, but
In
my
this
mind's going
situation.
like, well, how does this like relate with, you know, like not everything we do is we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done. We're not always in perfect will unless we're perfectly, you know, all the time. We're not perfect all the time because we're not perfect, but we still have God's presence and God's salvation. So I can kind of relate it that way, but however we rebel or don't say yes fully to God, we get kept out of opportunities and provisions of God sometimes because we hold back, God holds that back. So I look at it that way too, but I'm trying to figure out, because when you said back in verse, or in the chapter of, I guess Lord brought it up, but these were the ones who, I guess the Dathan and those people, not necessarily, the sons of Levi, I don't know, because there's some you said rebelled when they rebelled against not going, the spies, they agreed with the spies. So they've already been kept out because of that. I don't know, what did that, I mean, how much of God are they being kept out of? My mind's like trying to grasp this.
Well, I don't think that the fact that they're not in the promised land means they're not God's people. So, because at this point, so we have to kind of look at the progression, I think, of kind of the whole story, because we started out, if you think back to some of the narratives in Genesis and things like that, like when God calls Abraham. God calls Abraham, who was pagan, and there's this process of refining, and as the family grows, in some sense, there's salvation in some sense. I use that term loosely because I don't know that I think that that's the best way to describe it, but by association in some sense. So, which we struggle with because we don't think that way. We think like it's about your relationship with the Lord, but it's also about your relationship with, you know, I think there's an element of salvation which is not emphasized as much currently, but there's like, yes, it's about you acknowledging Yeshua as Messiah, but it's also about your relationship with the body of Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that in this sense, I think there's a greater emphasis on the body of Messiah. And so there are requirements to be part of the body or the nation of Israel at this point. But like the fact that God's presence is still with them and they're still the nation of Israel despite the fact that they haven't taken the land.
Yeah.
So I think that they are experiencing consequences for their disobedience. Like you're saying, like we experience those things as well. If God tells us something and we don't do it, it's reasonable to expect consequences.
Okay. No, the ones that were swallowed up, and
Mhm.
also, but there's other language when God says, if you disobey, I cut you off.
Mhm.
That's a pretty strong word, I cut you
Right.
off. But what about, it says the land swallowed them up, and
Mhm.
it says Korah and their children.
Mhm.
So, apparently there wasn't all the children, I don't know. But-
Yeah.
But the ones who were swallowed up or burned with the fire, what about them? Are they now cut off?
I would say so.
I think they are.
It sounds that way, but yes, and so there are still people and families who can be cut off.
So whoever wasn't a part of that specific rebellion, they get to continue on.
Yeah.
They don't go into the land.
Right.
Okay, so
Yeah,
there's just levels of,
Yeah.
where you were at.
So it's kind of like, I mean, the ultimate salvation is when the Lord brought them out of Egypt.
Right.
And so he saved them from slavery, he put his presence with them, but their rebellion is what keeps them from getting the fullness
Mhm.
of what he wants. In the same way, our rebellion could keep us from getting the fullness of what God
Right.
might want for us. It doesn't mean that we're not still walking with him, but by saying yes and agreeing with him, we can definitely, the ultimate thing was he wanted to bring them into this land.
Right.
That was the gift he wanted to give them. They rejected the gift.
Right. Which-
They still have him,
Yeah.
but they rejected the
Right.
gift.
I mean, it's not so different from the reality we live in now.
Yeah.
Because we are living in a reality where, yes, Yeshua has come, the kingdom of God is broken in, but it's not the fullness.
No.
There's a very pagan structure sitting on the holiest place on the planet right now,
Yeah.
in Jerusalem. Like it's the wrong. It's there's supposed to be a throne there, and it's not there. So all is not well.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
There you go.
So I'm kind of drawing this parallel reality that, we are part of the family of God. We are part of the body of Messiah, but we are looking toward the fullness when the fullness of his promise comes, very much like they are part of the family of God, that his name is on them, but they're not experiencing the fullness because of their disobedience, which means we all have a part to play. Tom teaches about this all the time, and this is what it's been a while since he's taught it, but he teaches kind of this garden to garden reality, and he calls it the kingdom family story, and he talks about where we are and that we have we're kind of coming to we're coming to the end of this phase of the fullness of the Gentiles, where then we look toward, we're looking toward and praying for the Jewish people, saying Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, unto the return of Messiah.
Yeah.
And we can help that process along, or we can slow it down.
We need to agree with what he's doing.
Right, and so it's aligning ourselves and being obedient and following what he's saying. So I don't know if that's really fully
No,
an
no,
answer
I
to your
understand.
question,
Yeah,
but I think that we have to look
I
at the broader
understand.
framework
That's true.
of some of that. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I agree. And I agree with the fact when they were brought out of salvation from Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
To have this attitude of, you didn't do this for us, and we need to go back to that land. They weren't really saying, they weren't really convinced they were delivered, because they didn't do what they wanted, and
Right.
that's why they rebelled, I guess,
Right. Well, it's this, I think it's this reality too of this like it's about relationship, right? Like they're wrestling with, can we really trust this God?
That's
And,
true.
you know, it's like, it's kind of like us, like, we have things we wrestle with about how we trust the Lord. And, you know, it's kind of the working out of your salvation in fear and trembling, right? It's like I think many of us can recognize kind of the power of the Lord, but there's still these moments when we're like, did he really say, is he really gonna do that? Like, and we have to wrestle with our own humanity
Yeah.
in those moments too. You know, the human condition doesn't seem to change is the point. So, anyway, well, it is, yes.
Emma, the thing here, is there any possibility that we know that maybe some of those 250 people that are innocent are being swollen to the ground?
I think it sounds like, I think it says at the beginning of it that they had, yeah, they had assembled, they kind of gathered this assembly. These were all, the 250 were all those who chose to go with Korah as part of the rebellion. So I think they're choosing to associate with
Even if
it.
it could be some infants and children?
No, they were renowned men. It doesn't say children, it says renowned.
Yeah, but
men.
later it does say their families were swallowed up. And so,
But they could be adult families.
they could be adult. I think there's a lot we don't know. I don't want to, I don't know that we can definitively say that. I'm not comfortable with making a definitive comment based on the text and my understanding of it.
I think it says renowned.
But that goes back to the
That's
responsibility we
not
have for our families. and
Yeah.
Well, these were, the 250 were burned.
You know,
Yeah.
to live right,
Yeah.
that affects our families.
Right, because I think in the same way we have other examples in the Torah and Scripture that the family was considered righteous because of the father. That I think it stands to reason that a family can be considered unrighteous because of the father too, and
Yeah.
we don't get to make that choice. That is up to the Lord.
Yes.
Well, let's leave it
So,
Yeah, Jim knows what's innocent.
yeah. So I'm going to pray really quickly, and we will go to service. So Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for Shabbat. We thank you for your instruction. Lord, I ask that you would just continue to refine us and to draw us closer to you and help us to be obedient to what you're saying, Lord, unto our participation in your master plan, Lord. We long to see the return of Messiah. We long to hear the Jewish people say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Lord, I just ask that your presence would continue to be among us. I thank you that you don't remove your presence from us.
Yeah.
I ask that your presence would be with us in service, and that that we would all just have hearts that are seeking to bring our worship and our best before you, Lord. B'shem Yeshua. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Emma.